When I was a teenager, I used to look back at all the stories of the Great War and World War II and all the action and heroism and drama of those times and sort of curse myself because I lived in such dull times. Back in the 90s, everything was bright and shiny and optimistic, a real golden age. But it was also, kind of boring. And I sort of wished that I lived in a time that was more interesting when global war threatened the horizon and there was the opportunity for heroism. And here we are, possibly on the verge of a great power conflict between Russia, China, the US, possibly other belligerents. India and Iran might come to mind, Turkey. And possibly we're already right at the beginning of it. It might have started maybe a year ago, maybe several years ago. What does World War look like in the era of mass telecommunications, of disinformation campaigns, automation and AI and bioengineering, of fifth generation warfare, a topic that has been discussed quite a bit over the last year or two, but which I don't think is well understood. And I hope that we can shed some light on some of those topics today. And with that, I'm going to open the floor. I'm going to suggest, maybe Grant, do you want to go first? I'm particularly interested in the 5GW topic, and I think you probably have more insight into that than anyone else here.
That's very flattering, John. I don't know that I do have more insight, but I think about it a lot. And, what I'm thinking today is kind of be colored. I'm reviewing an article that I can't, talk about who wrote it and stuff, but it's absolutely blowing my mind on previous doctrine in the spiritual domain of warfare and how we've done this before. Like, that's how we won the Cold War, is a thing called Project Solarium, and President Eisenhower getting together and coming up with this supranational grand strategy. I don't mean like supranational in the sense that, the global homo supernatural. I mean, like a domain above grand strategy, the spiritual domain, and getting purpose aligned at echelon throughout the country in order to contain the Soviet Union. And, fifth generation warfare is just another, when you're looking at the generations of warfare, it's just a framework to try and understand and wrap your head around what's going on. And I think it's actually a lot more straightforward to think of fifth generation warfare as just speaking to the complexities in modern information operations and telecommunications technology and how that interacts with the spiritual domain. Because the spiritual domain's always existed. Will, like the enemy's will, has always been the most important thing, because once the enemy's will is broken, that's the decisive point in any conflict. And now we're in a weird position where, we have the post-West, global homo hegemon that has, no will. We're not aligned spiritually, and it's why we can go to Afghanistan and get wrecked by the Taliban, or go to Vietnam and get wrecked by the Viet Cong, because they were spiritually aligned. I mean, especially the Taliban. And so it doesn't matter so much how many economic resources you have. Like, none of that stuff matters at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you're going to stop employing those resources if you lose the will to fight. And if you don't have a specific reason to be fighting, and there's like general principles that are tied into the spiritual domain, where if you're attacking or doing immoral things, that works against you. So, we're talking about World War III. I'd like to think that World War III isn't going to happen. Like, there's not going to be a World War III, because we're not the only institution, in the West that has a problem in the spiritual domain. The The Russian Federation faces it. The Chinese, like it's based on communism. Like they have their own problems. And the idea that things are going to spill over into a fight that people are going to perpetually keep pushing resources into, you know, barring the outbreak of nuclear war or something like that, I think it's just going to continue to be these regional conflicts until somebody on the side of good does a new Project Solarium and gets purpose aligned with kind of doing the right thing. And I hope that's going to be America at some point, because we do have a really good foundation in the origins of our country and what has traditionally been American being, and the spirit of America has been a good thing in the past, and we're just disconnected from that, and that's why we're responsible for so much stupidity lately. Harrison.
Well, I've got a question and a comment about that. So because I'm not familiar with Project Solarium, is it? But I'd be interested to know how much of that unity can be generated, kind of, and what the conditions are that can come about. Because now this gets to my comment. I wrote an article several weeks ago based on a book I read by Peter Turchin, War and Peace and War, and it's about the rise and fall of empires. So the conditions that go together to the creation of an empire, and then all the conditions that accompany its decline and collapse. And the concept that he focuses on the most in the book is the one kind of borrowed from Ibn Khaldun, asabiya. That's kind of it's like a unifying principle. It's the sense of togetherness. And he says for him, that's an essential feature of both imperial genesis and in imperial disintegration. The reason that empires are able to coalesce is because of that unified that unified feeling among the peoples within the empire. And of course, it can be a small region, like Rome went from a city to a world empire, Mediterranean world empire, and it did that through high asabiya, and then it collapsed because of low asabiya, and then that disintegration and that decohering is even evident today in South Italy, where in South Italy today, where it used to be, one of the regions of the highest sense of unification, the South Italy is now one of the most socially atomized places, like in Europe at least, and probably in the world, just because it's so low, where everything is at the individual or even family level, and even within families, people distrust each other. So there are no large-scale projects that happen in South Italy, just because the society for so long has been so fragmented and disconnected. So when I look at kind of what's going on today, I'd say probably. So that's why I agree with what you're saying, at least in the sense of, well, that might add a hope, but maybe also a fear, is that with asabiya so low, because Western civilization, Western countries are all they're approaching their crisis point or past it. We're in the crisis period of our own cycle, our own secular cycle, which is when asabiya is the lowest, and when things disintegrate, when people when there's like the conditions that lead to civil war. So there's polarization, not just polarization within the masses, but polarization between the masses and the elites, polarization within the elites. So intra-elite infighting. You put all these things together. Well, some leaders might be under the delusion that none of that matters, and that they will be able to, that we will be able to succeed, even if we don't have that foundation, which is that kind of spiritual unity that would allow us to fight and to win. And just one other thing on that subject is one of the things Turchin brings up about, I think the examples he brought up. He definitely brought up the Romans, and he brought up one or two others, and I think they might have been the early Russian Empire and the British Empire, I think. But the thing he said about them and fighting was that they weren't necessarily the greatest armies at the time, and they lost a lot of battles. But the thing about the imperial mindset is that they'd lose, but they'd keep fighting. They'd keep going back. So they might lose a battle, but then well, the way that he put it, they'd fight until they won. And they were able to do that despite sometimes having lesser forces, poorer conditions, but they were able to have that unity among their fighting forces to keep going until they managed to win. So I just wanted to bring that up as to tie in a couple of those concepts. But John, what did you have to say?
Yeah, so I don't disagree with any of that. But just to play devil's advocate, if you look at World War I, the Russians did not have a whole lot of Asapia. The Ottoman Empire, the sick man of Europe, was certainly not high in Asapia. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was similarly incredibly fragile. And of course, the war resulted in the dismemberment of the Ottoman Empire, the dismemberment of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the collapse of the Tsarist regime in Russia and the onset of the Russian Revolution. The point being that I definitely agree that the US in particular, and the West more broadly, has never been more fragmented internally. I mean, the social tensions are immensely high. There's no sense of common purpose. And yet all of our countries have an elite which has an absolute lock on institutional power, who are either utterly out of touch and up their own bungholes, drinking their own Kool-Aid, whatever metaphor you want to use, or just don't care because they have such a lock on institutional power. They don't need to care about whether or not their society is behind them in this kind of struggle. And historically, that's a particularly dangerous situation, because that's exactly the kind of elite which goes and does foolish things. And if you look at what's happened in the context of the Ukrainian conflict over the last year, I think we've got already a couple of examples of really ill-considered tactical escalations, which achieved short-term tactical victories, but were strategically ruinous, in my opinion. So, right off the bat, you've got the weaponization of the US dollar in terms of the Russian sanctions, which don't really seem to have hurt Russia at all, because, of course, the Russian economy is massively undervalued when you look at it from a purely monetary standpoint. The real economy is quite large. They have things that everyone wants, oil in particular. So the West sanctioning them, all that meant was the Russians just went and sold it to China and India instead, and they're fine. And then there's the Nord Stream pipeline, which is potentially the greatest act of interstate ecological terrorism and industrial terrorism which has ever been carried out. And certainly was very effective in making sure that Europe did not have the temptation to make nice with Russia, but I think from a long-term diplomatic standpoint was rather ill-considered, because it really pissed a lot of people off. So I mentioned those incidents to sort of highlight the fact that the current Western elite, I don't think they are very wise. I think they are very clever, but not very wise. And that, I think, is maybe really worrying, because that implies that even given the complete lack of asabiya, the underlying economic fragility of Western countries that don't really make anything anymore and have to import so much, even given all of these factors, which in my World War III article like a year ago, I went through all of those in detail. I think they might still push for it. That's, I think, something that can't quite be ruled out. So, yeah.
So I'd say that fits within the paradigm, exactly. So like, that's what you would expect. You'd expect them to do things that lead to short-term gains, because they got multi-domain operations and they're just not considering the spiritual domain. So like the pipeline is a perfect example, that might lead to some short-term positive battlefield effects, but it's obviously spiritually, reprehensible. So long-term, it's going to have those negative diplomatic outcomes, and you put it all together. But analyzing it like one thing at a time is like that's how you fall into these traps. And so yeah, I agree that they might see kicking off a large-scale conflict as producing some sort of short-term gain and not see the long-term consequences because they're not analyzing it from the spiritual domain. But that also means that it wouldn't, if anything does kick off, it'll end very quickly because there's not, the engagement in the spiritual domain isn't there to sustain it. Daniel, you had your hand up.
It's just well, I mean, it's kind of the open question that we kick out there, and we're kind of touching on it, which is is this incompetence or malice? An example from a non-military business is I don't know if you guys remember in the 90s, well, those of you who are Americans on this chat, Walmart, it was like becoming the number one retailer in the country, and so Kmart was kind of one of these legacy stores that had huge presence nationwide, but they they're kind of coasting on their former glory, right? Walmart's this new company, so Kmart at some point they recognize Walmart's a threat, and their executives are like, all right, we're just going to have a price war with Walmart. So they slash their prices and try to, basically imitate Walmart, but they had none of the logistics set up that Walmart had established. They had none of the business practices. So it's like Kmart just wound up hemorrhaging money. Walmart's like, all right, we'll have a price war with you, lowered their prices. They remained profitable, and it just pushed Kmart further over the edge. And it seems like, kind of what we're doing, with those conflict with Russia in Ukraine, and then we've got China looming over the horizon. It seems like it's consistent with the elites being like the Kmart executives in the 90s, like so far out of touch that they in their mind, they're still number one. We still got all this strength and resources. And, so of course we can, have a proxy war with Russia, just like it's, 1979 and the Soviets are in Afghanistan. And, we have the built up accumulated resources and standing in order to take them on, in that way, and of course, in the meantime, as I guess Nicola Soldo's, done or talked about on his stack, with this hubris that the leaders have, it's like rather than trying to separate China and Russia, it's like they're just taking them both on at the same time. So I guess anyway, we'll discuss more of the specifics of that later, but just, do you think that it's hubris that they really are just so deluded that they think nothing's changed? The U.S. is basically, it's always been it's as strong as it's always been, that we still have the logistics in place, the resources in place, the strength, the military might, all that, to just impose our will without any repercussion? Or do you think they're malicious, and it's almost like an act of planned sabotage? And going back to the retail example, this Kmart wound up being bought out by this billionaire who also bought Sears. And what he did with Sears in the 2000s was just basically everything that could be sold or mortgaged or spun off. He just ran it like a hedge fund, and everything was mortgaged or sold for short-term profits. Nothing was reinvested in the stores or the distribution or any of that. And so it's like Sears, just over time, they just kept losing position until they get to a point where there's nothing left. There's no possible way they can ever come back. They got debt, their debt to asset ratio is obscene, and so in that case, I think the hedge fund guy who bought Sears knew what he was doing. It wasn't like he maybe made up his mind that it's not going to ever be profitable. So let's just, get as much short-term value as we can out of it and then spin the corpse off to die, So you look at the way our elites are, that's also seems plausible too. And I'm not sure how to evaluate between the two, if it really matters, at the end of the day, if it's going to lead to the same place. But what you guys think? Is it incompetence, malice, both? How competent are these people?
Well, I guess I go next. So to answer your question, I don't know, but I tend towards hubris and stupidity, basically, because I when I think about like the U.S. and the U.S. politics, then it's pretty clear that they could pretty much do whatever they wanted, right, for a very long time, and they didn't even have to do anything, right? Their word was the law, on the world stage, kind of thing. And there was just this enormous economical power and military power that nobody could challenge or dare to challenge. And I think if you're just used to that, and all the generations who actually fought wars and built the whole thing, they all died out, right? And then you have like, I don't know, at least one, if not two generations who are just used, are basically like spoiled brats, right? Who basically can think and speak reality into existence, right? Whatever they publish on the New York Times, that's their reality, right? So, and I think they just thought they could just do that, right? I mean, if they say, all right, Russia, you did something bad there, so we threaten you with sanctions, and then you will just go away, right? I mean, I think that's my sense anyway, that the Western elites are just pretty lost in their narcissistic, psychopathic fantasy world at this point. But I want to say something about cohesion as well, because I found this discussion pretty interesting. And to be honest, I find it hard to see how in the West, as it stands now, there's any like spiritual cohesion to speak of that could, like, I don't know, turn the tide in favor of the West. I just don't. I mean, I'm pretty sure that we will rather see like that spiritual cohesion form as a kind of revolution than as a coming together as it is now to fight or to create that momentum. So I don't really see that. And if we think back at World War I, for example, I mean, it's just if you read a book like which I can highly recommend, Sebastian Haffner's Defying Hitler, which is actually a mistranslation in English. It's basically an autobiography, and he speaks in detail, how all this unfolded during World War I and the mood in the population and all that, and it's just unimaginable that like the amount of cohesion at that time. I mean, in part it was surely created by propaganda, but there was like just way more cohesive society to begin with, and they could actually pull off that kind of propaganda that really, really brought people on the same page, like on a visceral like level. It's just incredible, and I'm sure it was similar in England and other parties to the war. And I'm not sure if I look now at the situation, even with their propaganda, right, which is still strong. I mean, do people are there really people who like I mean, I guess there are some, but like who are like ready to die for Ukraine and see that as the grand, the grand fight of good against evil kind of thing where we all have to engage in. And I find the idea quite bizarre, and I just don't see it. And on the other hand, I'm no expert in like what's going on in Russia and China, but it almost seems like just the opposition to the West is creating like a lot of this kind of cohesion and this spiritual preparedness, grand as you call it, I think, or this momentum where it's like an epic battle of good against evil. For them, is they see the West as like this bully, inciting wars and blowing up pipelines and just causing misery everywhere, and then the whole woke nonsense. They see it exactly for what it is, right? So it also has this literally like a Christian or spiritual component. So yeah, that's just my quick take on that. So I don't really see it going anywhere at this point in the West. And as for the elites, maybe there are some there are always people who are smart who are trying to profit from these kinds of situations and might even, play with fire and want to bring down some of that stuff to make a buck, right? Or just don't care or whatever. But a lot of it is just, in my reading, stupidity and hubris. So, Mark, I think you're next.
Yes, hi. How you doing? Yeah, thanks for all that. I think the first thing is that I agree with all of the framing of this as being a matter of, as Harrison says, asabiya, or some sort of spiritual unity, or the lack of it. And I also kind of agree that with Grant that is probably a big reason that this is going to spill over into a World War III that's something like a traditional sequel to World War II, like a global turf war of allied states. It could. And if it did, I think it, obviously it would split along the lines of something like the remnants of the American Empire versus something like the BRICS bloc or some similar arrangement. If it started to get hot, I think, again, you would see other regional powers like Iran, Turkey breaking one way or the other. But I think that's unlikely. I think, though, a different sort of world war is more likely. And to frame that, I wanted to investigate a claim that John made a few days back. I think it was something to the degree of iron rules gold. And I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, but I kind of agree with it in principle. The idea is something like, I guess it's something like, if you have a bunch of gold and I have a sword, pretty soon I'm going to have a sword and a bunch of gold. And I think, though, if we frame it like that, we're saying, in other words, what's going on in Ukraine right now, right? Well, we have a bunch of local gangsters, and we have a bunch of private equity firms that are gobbling up assets on the cheap. That's the story. That's one story of what's going on there. But you could just say, well, that's just the normal war profiteering. That's just vultures. And it's not really gold ruling iron. It's just, gold being collected, in the aftermath of iron. But I think that if we look at it that way, the next logical question becomes, what rules iron? And I think, the most obvious answer to that is, well, the blacksmith rules iron. And by blacksmith, I mean something like the traditional sword and shield style weapons design and the industrial manufacturing base that supports it. In its current form, this would cover everything from air superiority to blue water navies, long-range artillery, mechanized infantry, down to boots on the ground. And these are all weapons that are developed essentially along the same evolutionary curve as the crossbow. The core design ethic is something like weapons that project more force, more accurately, and more efficiently over longer distances. And And I think that that is the core of like one type of blacksmith ruling iron. And the secondary rule there would be something like minimizing the destruction of useful assets. That would be infrastructure, energy resources, arable farmland, and so forth. You know, in other words, you don't want to salt the earth if you don't have to. And that's why I think that Ukraine will ultimately sort itself out, and it'll be divvied up. The spoils of war will be divvied up in the usual way. But there's a different. I think there's another candidate in the mix instead of the blacksmith. I think there might be stretches in history when it's logical to say that magic rules iron. And I think that we might be entering into one of those eras very soon, if we're not already in it. You know, this would be not just 5GW warfare. This wouldn't be just psyops. This would be something like an extreme form of asymmetric warfare based on experimental technologies that are totally unavailable to your enemies. For example, I think the last time that magic ruled iron was the invention and use of the atomic bomb. And there's some problems with that, though, because if magic rules iron, the first problem is that it doesn't usually last for very long. You know, the second somebody else gets his hands on his own doomsday device, there's no such thing as a doomsday device anymore. I think that's basically the story of the nuclear arms race. Once a country like India has nukes, you know, nukes stop existing for all practical purposes. Even arguably before that, like, you know, when the Soviets first mounted them on ICBMs, it's like now you have a dragon that blows up the wizard's own castle when you summon it, so you never summon it. But that doesn't mean that magic stops developing in the background, because it doesn't. You know, and that leads us to the other huge problem, is that most magicians are totally batshit insane. You know, that's the kind of the story of the arms race towards the end, when we kept churning out more nukes beyond any realistic advantage they could give us. But I think there's more to it than just like an economic insanity. I think that, and so when I look at the last couple of decades of every American conflict around the world, right? I step back and I try to understand this picture, because it's a weird picture. It's a bunch of boneheaded moves, like one after the other after the other. And as Luke was saying, I think a lot of that can be attributed to hubris. But here's a theory, and it's just a theory, and I don't know how much credence anyone should give it. But what if we step back and we looked at Iraq and Afghanistan, and very recently Ukraine? Like we all saw the video of the Patriot system getting owned, right? We all saw that. And it's almost unbelievable. It's just sort of like, if this is, you know, we have a White House that's executing these drawdown authorities in order to just basically empty our stockpiles of conventional weapons, right? And we have, in Afghanistan, we have this situation where we just kind of left everything behind. You know, it's just like, yeah, have fun with it, Taliban. You know, all of this looks like it's like we're saying hubris, and also lack of spiritual unity, lack of the will to fight, a brain drain of competence from the upper echelons on downward. I think all of that plays into it. But I think there also might be some kind of an intramural warfare in the background going on between the blacksmith approach, right? Traditional, conventional, meat grinding, ranged weaponry, and behind the scenes, you know, with, you know, some of the weirder projects of DARPA, let's say. Like, and I think it maps all the way down to, like, you know, all of the failures. Like, we think about something like the F-35 stealth fighter, which was just this epic flop that was 20 years in the making, right? We poured so much money, so much brain power into this, and it's unworkable. Or the idea that our carrier groups can't stop hypersonic missiles, which would make them totally irrelevant if China and Russia had them, and it's looking like they do. You know, that's a whole lot of gold down the shitter right there. And then you add, you know, these, I mean, it's like, so maybe there's a reason behind all of this stupidity. And if so, I think the reason might be that whether it's the DoD, the Pentagon, the deep state as a whole, I think they might be making a transition, a big transition to unconventional warfare. That they're essentially being nudged or even forced into handing the reins over to the magicians at DARPA. They've been lobbying for more gold and control ever since the end of the Cold War and before, frankly. And I think that's when we run afoul of the whole all wizards are insane rule. If you try to keep tabs on these projects like I do, I'm guessing you know what I mean. You know, I'm not just talking about automated weapons platforms or biowarfare agents. You know, I'm talking super soldiers with programmable brains. I'm talking, you know, cyborg insects fitted out with microscopic surveillance gear. Shit like optogenetics, like where they use magnetized proteins to remotely stimulate nerves and control muscle movements with pulses of laser light. This is the type of stuff. This is the stuff they admit to publicly. They brag about this stuff in white papers and in industry rags. I mean, who knows what they're cooking up in the back? You know, these dudes are crazier than a snake's elbow. And I think the brass is now looking at, you know, world war is a war they can't possibly win with conventional weapons. And I think they're right about that. I mean, they couldn't even win against a bunch of goat herders in Afghanistan. And unless it was done on purpose, they couldn't even retreat from them properly. What are we looking at here? You know? And if that's the case, if they're planning to open up this Pandora's box of DARPA monsters, then if we do have a world war, I think it's going to be one hell of a scary ride. And you might actually inadvertently get that spiritual unity as a result of it. Strangely enough, they might be building, you know, it's like, you know, what are we called? What does the Taliban call us? What does Iran call us? The Great Satan? We're beginning to look a lot more like the Great Satan, frankly. And like, if even a tenth of what these people plant in the shadows comes out into the light to play, I think very quickly you might see maybe even a transnational kind of spiritual unity developing. And maybe that's the hidden war that's going on. It's something like the transhumanists and the elite global homo versus humanity. And all of this other business, the proxy wars and like the, you know, the color revolutions and all that, like that's more sort of cover fire for what's actually going on. I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts about any of that nonsense?
Yeah, I got some thoughts on that. So like, I think the 20th century really primed us to expect world wars or wars in general to be really technologically disruptive. So, you know, World War I, you had all of these technologies like flight and machine guns that completely changed the face of conventional warfare. And they caught all of the generals of Europe completely with their pants down and turned the whole thing into a meat grinder until tactics caught up with it. And then similarly, World War II, mechanized warfare, again, air power. You had a total change in doctrine. And what was, in both cases, the impact of technological advances was apparent pretty much at the beginning of the war. And what I found sort of interesting, I mean, assuming that the Ukrainian conflict is kind of the first front of World War II, is that the technological differences with previous wars don't actually seem that remarkable. If anything, they sort of reverted back to World War I style trench warfare. Now, both sides are equipped with advanced technology. You know, they both have drones, for example. The Russians have hypersonic missiles. So, okay, so the Russians can penetrate American, Ukrainian, but you know what I mean, NATO missile defenses more effectively. So that's a bit of an edge. Drones seem to be making a lot less of a difference than I would have expected. And that seems to come down to electronic warfare kind of largely nullifying the tactical advantages of them. Because of course, if you have a drone and the other side has good EW capabilities, then either they can jam your ability to control your drone, making it a lot less useful, or they can triangulate your position as you're communicating with it, which makes the use of the drone itself intrinsically hazardous, because you need a continuous signal in order to control it. So it's been surprising to me how advanced it isn't so far. And maybe that just means that both sides are keeping their most advanced weapons back. But I also kind of wonder to what degree a lot of it could be kayfabe. We've had, outside of information technology, really in the world of atoms, which is pretty relevant to warfare, we've had kind of a stagnation in technology for the last couple of generations. Our basic weapon systems have not changed that much from what we were using in Vietnam. And our everyday consumer technologies, similarly, like, are not really that different from what we would have had back in the 1970s or even the 1960s. So that's one factor. And then another thing that I think is worth pointing out is that, the magician can definitely have an impact, as Mark was saying, but they won't necessarily win you the war. So again, if you look back at World War II, and I hate sort of always coming back to World War II, everyone always does that. But, there's no question, at least in my mind, that the country that had the most advanced military research was Germany, by far. Okay, they didn't get the nuke first, but they were pretty far along in that. They had rockets, jet engines, all sorts of really strange stuff that they were experimenting with. Things like magnetic levitation and giant cannons and just crazy stuff. And yet, despite for instance, having the first jet fighter aircraft that outflew anything the Allies could put in the air, they lost the war. Why? Because they couldn't make enough of it fast enough. They had, they had like the first cruise missile, the V1, the first effectively almost an ICBM, the V2. And yet that didn't win them the war either, because conventional explosives on a V2, okay, it was a bit of an annoyance when something comes screaming down from the sky, but at the it wasn't a game changer, not within a nuke on the end. So, okay, there's no question, I think, that America has probably the most advanced weapons research culture on the planet. I don't know exactly what the Chinese and the Russians have, but it seems to me that the Chinese are constantly playing catch up. But looking at American research culture, at least in the civilian world, you've got a huge number of programs that are mostly large bureaucracies that exist as effectively jobs programs that don't actually come out with much in the way of disruptive technology. Everything is always 5 years away, 10 years away. We're going to have fusion soon. Yeah, they've been saying that since like 1970, So on paper, it looks like you've got all of this amazing magical technology that you're going to pull out. And then where actually is it, right? And, the stuff that does work, okay. I know that they're testing beam weapons, like lasers, for instance, for shooting down missiles. Really cool. Okay, why aren't they shooting down those Russian hypersonic missiles with those? Well, that's because they have like one or two. Like they're not mass manufacturing these things because the industrial base is not there in order to make these things at scale. So yeah, and just sort of some thoughts on that. It's not necessarily as straightforward as he who has the most advanced technology is going to win the war. And on the iron rules gold thing, yeah, I was being a bit cheeky there. You basically got it. It's if you have a sword, you can take someone's gold. That's history kind of shows that. But I was also kind of making a bit of a dig at the there's, people say stuff like the pen is mightier than the sword, which I think is not always so true. Sometimes the sword really is mightier than the pen. And we also have this idea of this, we have this kind of like mercantile culture where, money rules everything. And again, if you look at what happened with Russia about a year ago with the sanctions, on paper, the US has this huge economy and it should have been able to completely destroy the Russians with these sanctions. And then it turns out, well, no, because wealth on its own, especially if it's not real wealth, it doesn't actually go as far as you think it will. Now I'm starting to ramble, so I'm gonna, and I see a bunch of hands up, so I'm gonna pass it on to. I actually forget whose hand is up first.
Grant's hand.
I'll respond. I'll kick it back over to Mark, because some of what I wanted to say was in relation to what he was saying. So, I mean, I am pretty confident, about as confident as I can be. My 95% confidence interval and all my beliefs are, just probabilities with error bars, because I have epistemic humility. The people ruling us right now don't have that. They are philosophical and spiritual ignoramuses. They're a bunch of atheist, technocratic materialists. And so they don't see or understand the situation that we're in, and really the hopelessness of their cause. Like, they think that you can rewrite reality with power. And you can do all this stuff in the short term. It just doesn't work in the long run. In the long run, they're going to fail because they're not engaging in the spiritual domain. And the interesting thing about that domain and engaging in it is, if they did, then they would develop epistemic humility and they wouldn't be on the wrong side of the fight anymore. It's just this beautiful self-correcting system where, if you're going to be on the right side of history, you have to engage in that domain and understand some of these basic things. And in order to be spiritually enlightened, that comes with some degree of humility. It's an antidote to the hubris that drives this. They're ignoramuses, really. And it's really hard to wrap your head around that, because they have so much power that it's like, how could they be so short-sighted and not see this? But do any of you guys disagree with that? I'll hand it back over to Mark. But do you not just completely agree with that? I think a lot of your writing, you talk about this exact issue, and how when you have this hubris and you don't have these traditional, I won't even say traditional, but just religious beliefs and this understanding of things that are transcendent. If you don't have that, then something comes in to fill the gap. And that is, you can call it demonic, you can call it whatever you want, but that's what takes over. And it seals their fate and their commitment to atrocity. And so that's why they're going to lose. And that's why it's not like, we can't think of World War III in terms of, nations, and because it's like, who's in charge. It all comes, like, the battle lines are just clearly, to me, they're spiritual at this point. People that have that, actually awareness versus not.
Sorry to jump in there, but I meant to mention that because Mark was saying this, and I think and I wanted to agree with this, that looking at it in terms of Russia and China versus the West, I think is probably an error. Like, I think to a large degree, this is more like the Western global elite versus humanity, with the home population being every bit as much the enemy as truculent foreigners. There's a quick interjection there, Mark.
Hey, sorry. Totally agree with Grant. No, I have no objection to framing it that way. That is the frame. I would almost argue that's always been the frame, even though it becomes more apparent at times and less apparent at times. We're always kind of in that conflict. And yes, the bad guys are always going to be full of hubris. And because of that, they're going to be blinded by it. And just to speak to John's previous comment, I don't believe that they will win. I think that they are engineering the seeds of their own destruction, as they will always do. You know, part of being, I think, core to being evil in a lot of ways, not just to doing evil, but say we could draw some line, there's some threshold that you can cross where we could just say, well, these people are evil. It's not what they're doing. It's what it's fundamental to their being. It's fundamental to the way they perceive reality, to the way that they perceive humanity. And once you cross that threshold, there's a lot of problems. You know, forget the DARPA monsters. I'm not afraid of them. I think that they will be self-defeating. Actually, I think that they'll be easily defeated, if not technologically, then through other means. But even technologically, I think that, you know, just putting my scientific mind to work on some of these problems, I'm like, it's not such a big deal. You know, it's like it's a big scary monster that, you know, it's got a fatal weakness. It's allergic to garlic or something. So no, I didn't mean to imply that like somehow magic wins wars. Magic can sometimes end certain battles or certain or shift the battlefields in some way. But no, I think ultimately we are looking at a situation where the hubris is super intense. These people are as incompetent, at least the ones we see, I do believe are every bit as incompetent as they appear to be. That doesn't mean that like you don't have people behind the scenes that are looking to take advantage of this boobery, which I think there always are. And whether those are financial interests, again, private equity firms, we all know what's happening. We all know what happens when Ukraine becomes a battlefield. It's it's the breadbasket of the world in some ways. Just on agribusiness alone, you know, you could look at it and say, oh, everybody's like waiting to divvy this up. They all want a slice of that pie. And then we could also look at it in terms of like, just to say about like, well, who's really the good guys here? You know, it's like when we look at the history of NATO since the end of the Cold War, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, we could very easily look at NATO and say, hey, what are you guys up to? I have questions, you know. I have serious questions about like what it is that you think that you're doing when you're radically expanding it and saying like, well, we're the world police now. Well, who put a badge on you for that? I don't recall that being your mission. So like as these questions come up, and I think that they will continue to in the minds of many people, not just, you know, a couple of radical extremists on the right or something like that, but like rather in the minds of basically everyone who's going to feel the effects of this. They're going to feel the effects of de-dollarization, right? They're going to feel the effects of the end of the petrodollar. They're going to feel the effects of centralized digital banking. They'll feel these things, and I think that I'm a bit optimistic about the near future because of that, because I do know that as much as spiritual unity wanes, you know, in the wake of modernity or in the you know sort of the backgrounding of religion or the you know the death of sort of even like civics, like as it wanes, it could quickly gain force again. It is one of because it's a property without a mass. Essentially, it's something that can be summoned at will, and all it would take was one great typhoon of it to turn this all around. And so that, I mean, it's not that I'm betting that way, but I'm just saying I'm putting that out there as a possibility that like this is the kind of war that could turn on a dime, and it's the kind of enemy that by nature self-destructs because it's treacherous and it's people betray each other, or they'll turn each other in on a dime, you know, that sort of a thing. So yeah, I just want to turn it over now. Who had their hand up first? I see several.
Luke.
I think that was me. Yeah. So just to keep on the same theme, Mark, I'm optimistic as well. I think the dynamics are just so unpredictable, and everything can change so fast. We don't usually see it, right? We kind of have still this gradualist dogma in mind that everything just goes slowly and one step at a time. But things can change dramatically, and I wanted to dwell a little bit on this question of hubris as well, that both you and Grant talked about. And I think that's super important because, I mean, I've grown up idealizing a lot of these people in power, right? I mean, I don't know, like the Hillary Clintons of this world and all of these, this power elite that went to Ivy League schools and sitting in their fancy offices and having so much power and project this image of like being totally in command and all that. And it's actually quite shocking when you realize it's not just that they're like evil, I mean, that's part of it, but they are also really, really stupid. And they have this ignoramus. I think it's a really fitting word, and it's not necessarily the kind of like stupidity that they can't read and write and that sort of thing, although you never know these days. But it's like this kind of spiritual stupidity, right? It's just and I know some religious people kind of try to frame it that way, like if someone is in office, let's say, and either he accepts the Lord Savior or he doesn't, and that determines whether he's a good guy or not. I mean, but it's obviously not that simple, right? The spiritual question is a bit more subtle, and I think you may say it's just about like having a good grasp of a higher ideal and the humility that goes along with it, right? And it's hard to see sometimes because it can be a subtle thing, but I think these days, and that's actually the good thing about these crazy times, that it becomes just more and more obvious, right? We have so many examples from both sides. I mean, I just recently watched a little bit of RFK Jr.'s talk with Russell Brand, although it's on Rumble and Rumble is censored here, so it's a bit problematic. But speaking of crazy times, but there were still a few snippets, and RFK, I mean, he basically said the same thing, right? It's that he has this kind of spiritual outlook, even though he's not like an openly like over religious guy, but he has said explicitly that he has this spiritual outlook that keeps him grounded and that keeps him fighting, basically, right? It's this sense of like, no matter what they do to him, that it's just something higher, and it doesn't have anything to do with getting rich and powerful, or I mean, some of that might play into it as well. But I mean, say about him what you will, but I think he's sincere in that sense, right? And then there's the contrast to like these people who just collapse into their ego, basically, and that can only lead to like real complete ignorance of like the what actually drives people, like their reading of situation, the reading of their population, of everything that's going on. And it's just a downward spiral once you're like just in that frame of mind, in that kind of psychological collapse, right, into the self. It's just incredible to watch, really, and it ultimately, I think it leads to literal like stupidity and a detachment from reality that is so severe, that can be hidden for quite a while, but these days it's just so blatant, right? It's just so incredible to watch this whole spectacle, and it's really fascinating. I think that it has become so obvious, let's say. And so I think the situation can change very dramatically, and it's in part because of this this incredible disconnect between many in the so-called elite and what's really going on. So here's on a hopeful note. I think Daniel, we were next in line, right?
Yeah. Hey, yeah, no, you're talking about these people. I forget what you said about how stupid they are early on in your remark. Reminded me of the Enron book and movie, or The Smartest Guys in the Room, tongue-in-cheek title, but just that they had these MBAs, highly credentialed, supposedly had all these great theories about how you can basically pull profits out of a hat like a rabbit out of a magician's hat, with creative enough accounting. And it turned out contradicts some basic fundamental reality. It didn't work, blew up. And that seems to be kind of the case we're in now with if you're familiar with whether in philosophy or sociology or whatever, or economics, people will have, with great credentials, they'll put forward these profound sounding theories that seem to have explanation for everything, if you assume they're priors, but then they wind up reaching these absurd conclusions that somebody who's just a kid who's not familiar with the theories involved could look at it and say, oh, this is bullshit, but yet once you're brainwashed almost within this set of theories and everybody around you is spouting them too as if they're meaningful, it's the whole emperor has no clothes phenomenon. And just looking at while China and Russia are worried about building better, deadlier weapons and getting advantages the old-fashioned way through espionage and all that, it's like we're worried about pronouns and drag queen story hour and all that sort of stuff. Like, I mean, that they're using drag queens in Navy recruiting ads, and they're having it's just, I don't know if it's like some basically on ship having people from the Rainbow Coalition reading poetry about their sexuality to the entire ship. It's stuff like this that if they're contradicting basic biology, something as fundamental as that, that there's humans are a sexually dimorphic species, and you can't just put on a dress and wear lipstick and claim, all right, I'm magically the same as a biological woman now. If they're that disconnected from reality on something that's so basic and fundamental to human nature, then surely in their behind closed doors, top secret meetings where they're hashing out their strategies about how this is going to work, and they're trying to play whatever 5D chess or however many dimensions it is they think they're playing chess in, that disconnect is going to be there in that setting as well. And so I'm sure they have this great plan laid out, and I'm sure it's totally, the first contact with reality is just going to get blown to pieces. So I guess their incompetence is, a hopeful thing for us. And on that note, I would say, I think it's a World War III, as much as it would suck for everybody, is maybe the best of the possible bad outcomes. And what I mean by that is, if, Niccolo Soldo's Turbo Americana, the elites being united and just raping and pillaging the people of the world, if they're that united and that dead set on what they want, which they've announced, the whole Agenda 2030 thing, we're supposed to be living in pods, surveilled endlessly, the useless eaters will be, just playing video games and drugged up, there'll be this side. I mean, all the things that they want to happen, like that's the future we have to look forward to, if the elites are not toppled either by intra-elite competition, which maybe is starting to happen. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Or black swan events, which, given how much, the ruling class has hollowed out the society over which they're ruling, destroyed Asabia. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. You know, as with John's article, you know, the nutrition, the lifestyle, everything is unhealthy. You know, so you got this sick, diseased, divided, you know, people on a cocktail of prescription medications for psychiatric disorders. You know, all this sort of stuff going on, and you know, the first time there's a big black swan event that they haven't planned for, you know, in their, you know, labs in Wuhan or Ukraine or wherever it is, they come up with this shit. If the first time a black swan event happens that they can't control, I don't think there's no resilience in the system anymore, you know? And so it's like, that could be, it's one of those things. It's like, we're in a fight for our lives and they have the chokehold locked in, you know, on the regular people. And if there's not chaos introduced somehow, they're going to get the choke. They're going to put us out and it's done. We're living in pods, all that sort of stuff, you know. But if chaos is introduced, and this is one of the things with them being so full of hubris and stupidity, is that they think they're better able to manage the chaos. Like there is this controlled demolition of the world, maybe. I don't know what it is that they think they're doing, but it's like they think they're going to be able to manage this chaos as things unravel, as they, you know, maneuver humanity towards this Agenda 2030. Right. And it's, to me, it's like they're the least poised to do that because of how disconnected they are from reality. So it's like indirectly, or I don't know, ironically, it's actually a hopeful thing, even though it will surely suck and war is never good and nothing to just charge into. But the fact that these elites that we have seem determined to do it, and the fact that unless they're toppled, they're gonna, you know, the future is a fate worse than death for us. Maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe there's something to be hopeful about. But anyway, sorry for rambling. Pass it on over to John.
Yeah, I feel like there's some sort of cosmic principle at work, in the sense that the universe is always sort of, you know, infinitely larger than you are. And any attempt to control it, to completely conquer and dominate the world, is pretty much doomed from the outset. And you can get quite far along the way and have a lot of successes on such a venture, but ultimately something will happen that will cause that control to falter and fall apart. And, you know, you look historically, there have been previous conquerors, previous empires that have tried to control the entire world, and they've all ultimately come down. Some of them very quickly, Napoleon or Alexander. Others took a little bit longer, like Rome or Britain. But inevitably, they all run up against something. So, you know, I'm glad you brought up like the World Economic Forum types, because, you know, ultimately that's, I think, Davos man who's kind of driving all of this. Yeah, they hold forth their Agenda 2030 podopoly as the sort of great vision for, you know, what we all get to live in if they win. No one likes that, so they've got a problem there. In order to maintain control in their domestic populations, they have to do all sorts of things to keep them continuously weak, you know, biologically weak, mentally weak, spiritually weak, divided, you know, all of these things that make them far less effective as warfighters. But then they also need that domestic population in order to effectively subjugate the foreign populations that are not quite so eager to go all in on the Agenda 2030. So, for instance, the Russians, the Chinese. And then that connects back onto, okay, what are the objectives here, right? So, you know, forgetting for a moment about the sort of sociological dimension and just looking at the sort of geopolitical dimension, you know, what are the victory conditions? So the victory conditions for the West are essentially total subjugation of China, Russia, of the global South, nothing less than total world domination by the American empire will suffice in order for them to be able to do their Agenda 2030 thing. But the victory conditions for Russia and China and India and all the rest of BRICS and so on are quite a bit simpler than that. It's basically don't get conquered. They're in a defensive posture fundamentally, which is a lot easier to organize to generate asabiya from. Those people over there are coming over here to take our stuff from us and make us do things the way that they do them. Is really easy to get people ginned up to fight. And as far as I've been able to tell, the appetite for the Ukraine conflict has not really slackened much in Russia over the last couple of years, despite it sort of dragging out for a while. Whereas, in the West, you've got some fraction of the population who are like, yay, I want to eat the bugs, I want to have my carbon tracked and so on. But they're actually a minority. Most people look at that with horror. They don't want that future. They hate their elites, If it comes to an actual shooting war, I mean, there's already a recruiting shortfall in the US, but I think most Western countries are experiencing that because no one wants to fight for this. Okay, so they're going to have a draft. Well, okay, now you do that. Now you've got a bunch of conscript soldiers who are very deeply unenthusiastic about being there. Historically, that has not worked out well. You're going to end up with a lot of sabotage, for instance, and that highly technologically sophisticated military with that really long logistical train in order to make the tip of the spear in order to keep it lethal, has a lot of moving parts in it, which are all very easily monkey wrenched. So, I mean, the point is they've really kind of got their work cut out for them. Like they're gradually losing control internally as people turn against them, and externally, Russia and China certainly have no particular reason to play ball. So I don't see their project succeeding. I think 10 years time we come back and it's sort of like this bad dream of the past. Hopefully it could be that they managed to implement it to a large degree in the West and sort of hold on as this kind of crumbling rump state, enforcing the pronouns and the Green New Deal and everything on the peasants back home, while the rest of the world just kind of gets on with the future. But I don't think they're going to have the ability to enforce this globally. Which doesn't mean that we won't have a lot of conflict, because if you look at World War II, it was basically just a huge number of small scale conflicts all kind of snowballing on top of one another. So you had Germany and Japan kind of as the most active belligerents, but you zero in on the European theater and you had all sorts of score settling happening with various groups in the Balkan states, for instance, or the Baltic states, or all over Eastern Europe, all these little brush fire wars kind of opportunistically popping off. And I could very easily see something like that happening. Yeah, that's all I had to say. Was Grant or Daniel?
It was Grant.
So I think there's something really interesting to focus in on that might be obvious to a lot of people, but you pointed it out, and I think it's a salient point that their victory conditions a lot harder. Trying to make a multipolar world is a heck of a lot easier than trying to make a unipolar world. Infringing upon people's self-determination takes a tremendous amount of resources. And sometimes it's possible to do that for good reasons and be on the side of good. I mean, the classic example to use here is the American Civil War, where as soon as that war became about slavery, the North had the moral authority because, slavery is not consistent with American being and the spirit of America. It never was. And so before that's what it was about, when it was just about self-determination, the South had the edge. But as soon as it was about the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, it was about slavery and ending slavery. That was it. And so, but I think that only exists at the level of a nation. So I don't think that there's any atrocity that is so beyond the pale that warrants one nation going to war with another nation to stop what people are doing within their own borders. And the only reason I say that is because, look at the atrocities that we've tolerated over the last 100 or so years. You have to tolerate them because you don't have the resources to stop them. And the only people that do are the people that are local. And honestly, programs like foreign aid essentially creates a lottery or this system where, hey, if you can, especially in contested areas like Somalia, where you could say, hey, if you can say that you have a government and you have a monopoly on force in this geographic area, then we'll give you a big pot of money continually that you can spend however you want. So, I think that asymmetry, that's really the asymmetrical battle that's going on, that anybody who's striving for hegemony ultimately can't win, because you're trying to impose your will on these, billions of people that don't want what you're selling. They don't want it. And there's just not the capacity to force that. And in the process of forcing it, it creates more opposition. The more coercion you use, the more you demonstrate that you don't have the moral high ground. So this all relates to that spiritual domain. I just they just don't see it. They just don't understand that this is a rule, a fundamental rule of nature. And if they did, I think that they would change tactics potentially. But in the process of changing tactics, they'd no longer be the bad guys. Daniel.
Yeah, no, that's exactly, agree with you 1,000%. There's just a couple of things. One, I don't know, I assume you guys are Philip K. Dick fans. The dude's like a prophet. And there's one story, just to toss out as a recommendation. Interesting to read in light of today's world and today's topic, Null-O, Null-O, or about a group of psychopaths who try to hijack the world. The militaries of the dominant world powers in order to basically destroy humanity. Anyway, kind of interesting in light of the world we seem to be living in today. But the other thing, so Jesse Kelly talks about this, and I wonder if it's right. It kind of goes back to the whole, I'm sure they're evil. Are they competent and pretending to be incompetent? Or are they really, incompetent? I'm not totally sure. I guess it doesn't really matter for this proposal. But he says that they're not destroying the military. They're creating a new one, basically one that will turn inward on its own citizens, with the soft purges of, with the vaccine mandates and, the ideology that's being promulgated from on high with the DOD, the type of recruitment ads that they have with drag queens and all that, getting kind of removing the good old boys that maybe would have enlisted, for purposes of, patriotism or whatever 20 years ago, who would never flatly contradict the Constitution, do something to their fellow citizens, and replace them with people who are ideologues that probably would. And I don't know if that's the case. I mean, it's a consistent, that analysis seems to be consistent with what they're doing. And of course, I don't think they're competent. And so it's bound to backfire, especially given what we see going on in the world with the Cold War 2.0 with Russia, as China is definitely eyeing Taiwan. And I'm not sure what our policy officially is with Taiwan at this point. I mean, they've made promises of, we'll defend them, but that's not realistic given, how close China is to Taiwan and how easy it would be for them to project military strength there versus us, especially if it's been brought up with them having hypersonic missiles. Our aircraft carrier groups are not going to be that relevant. So anyway, if they're, purging the military of traditional patriots, for lack of a better term, people that respect the Constitution and take the oath seriously, replacing them with ideologues who are committed cultural Marxist, communist, whatever, I could see them doing that, but it's going to lead to the same place if World War III kicks off. I thought, with 1984 seemed like a terrifying dystopian future, but they're coming up with something that's as worse. Instead of Big Brother, this manly figure with the mustache looking at you, watching you. It's like some tranny with, pink hair, watching you and ready to send you off to the gulag. So anyway, do you think that that's their aim with what they're doing with the military? Are they trying to create a new military that would turn on, like, for a war on America's own citizens? And if so, does that, well, I mean, it seems like with the state of the world, if we get into World War III, that would destroy that plan, because such a military would not be able to fight a foreign foe. But I wonder, how serious is some of this stuff? Like, you see the footage, say, of Zelensky with these photo ops, it seemed, or Brandon having a meeting with Zelensky, and they play the air raid sirens as he's walking out, even though there's no air raid happening, and Russia, in fact, has been notified ahead of time that Brandon would be there, so there's no threat that they're even gonna, bomb the place. How much of this is theater and posturing, and how much of this do you think that they really are enemies at the end of the day, to where and maybe the Chinese are, I don't know, they seem to own a lot of our leaders, and I'm not even sure how to articulate the question that I'm raising, but I guess there's two of them. Do you think that they're creating a military with the purpose of using it against American citizens? And then two, do you think if that's the case, how serious do you think they are about also simultaneously picking a fight with a foreign foe? How much of that do you think could just be theater, posturing, or whatever?
I'll try and answer that, and I'll kick it over to Mark. So, I mean, I think they're selecting for compliance more than anything else. So they're not like, oh, we're trying to purge these people. No, they have a specific ideology, and they want people to comply generally, because that's how they operate. It's like power is the most important thing. And so they don't necessarily have any specific plans for the military in mind, but as long as everybody in the military complies, regardless of, the spiritual dimension, which they don't see as legitimate. Like, I don't think they see it. So when people are like, that violates my religious beliefs, they're like, that's stupid. Like, there's no such thing as those. Meanwhile, they have their own religious beliefs that they view as secular, about like it's an abstruse humanitarianism, where, like, the best thing that we can do is, like, equal rights, egalitarianism, and that's, making sure that trans individuals feel included, that, say, women feel included in combat arms. That's all part of the ideology. So, I mean, I think those are the overwhelming dynamics that govern that, as opposed to some deliberate, like, hey, these people, we need to purge these specific people. I don't think there's that level of awareness, but there could be for some people. But I mean, they essentially, they believe in public health, right? You know, like they believe it's this thing that improves readiness. Like, they're just like, I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people. Like,
You think they're true believers? Like,
yeah,
they actually
exactly.
drink the Kool-Aid, and they're not just, this isn't an act to smoke. They're really from the top down, really believe.
And then for
that's probably right.
And for SecDef, you know, like sending weapons to Ukraine is a good, you know, that's good strategy. And meanwhile, like, my stock in Raytheon goes up. You know, maximizing vaccine uptake is going to be the best thing for the health of the force for the COVID vaccine. Meanwhile, my stock in Tenet Healthcare goes up 7 figures, right? So it's like they work in concert like that. It's efficient self-deception, whatever you want to call it, but that's kind of how I see it. Mark.
Okay, well, so much has happened since my original, since the point I originally wanted to make, which was, I think, about the idea of a unipolar world being a victory condition, which was way back. I think John might have been the first one to dip his toe into that, or maybe it was Grant. But in any case, I agree with that. I agree that, like, again, that's a crazy victory condition, essentially an impossible one, at least not for the long term. I don't even think for the short term. But then Daniel jumped in with some interesting stuff that made me reconsider a few things. So I think the initial question that Daniel was asking, I think, is something on the order of how much of this is planned? How much of what looks like it might be stupidity is like a, you know, maybe not smart, but like a more hubristic, broader stupidity, like maybe hubris stacked upon hubris. So in other words, at one level, yeah, you may have true believers. You may have, as Grant says, like these people that embrace something like a utilitarian humanism, which doesn't even really make any sense. It's kind of a contradiction. But suppose it, you know, again, we're not accusing these people of being sane. We're not accusing them of making sense. That's the last thing in the world that we would accuse them of. So yeah, maybe at some certain strata, there is this kind of pseudo-religious belief that says, hey, like, let's put this drag queen out as a Navy advertisement because it's the right thing to do. That could be extant at a certain level. At a different level, you might have people that are saying something along the lines of, we need to change the composition of forces. We need to find some kind of spiritual unity, any kind of spiritual unity, even if it's something like we find as many, angry transsexuals as we can, and we arm them, and we tell them who their enemies are, and we unleash them like wild dogs. Like, they may, in other words, have a broken understanding of spiritual unity and be striving for that. I think I see that all over the AI debate, for example. I see it in lots of debates, lots of debates that are bubbling up to the surface, even in cryptocurrencies. You're beginning to see people reaching really far for some manner of like capturing and holding spiritual energy. That, because again, as it seems we all agree, and I'm glad we disagree on some things, but it seems we all agree that like that is really like the most important capital, the most important resource when you're engaged in some sort of war. And if we consider that like these people are engaged in a kind of a end game war where they see themselves as becoming something like the masters of the universe, something like an internal order. And I use the word eternal intentionally. I was just watching, just to bring art back into it, I was watching Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade the other night. And the character of Martin Donovan has always been very interesting to me. He's the philanthropist, millionaire, rich guy who's funding the expedition for the search for the Holy Grail. And at the end of it, he says something super interesting, probably the best line in all of those films, maybe in anything that Spielberg ever wrote or was attributed to. And it was that, you know, the Nazis want to rule the world. Well, they're welcome to it. You know, I'll be toasting to my own life, you know, long after they've gone the way of the dodo. And what he was saying was interesting because it's like the Nazis exist in Martin Donovan's model of reality. The Nazis exist at a certain stratum and of hubris, where they say like, we're going to conquer the world. Yeah, good luck with that, right? What are you going to do with it after you conquer it? How are you going to hold it? How are you going to keep it? Which means that like, even if victory was possible, which I agree with everybody else, it's not even for a moment, probably. Even a moment would be illusory. But suppose that they did. It's sort of like, you know, there is another layer stacked above of hubris, of people that, you know, again, we're talking about transhumanists that believe not in eternal life of the soul, but eternal life of the body. In other words, they have cobbled together their own weird sort of spiritual framework, some spiritual superstructure on which they're hanging all of these various projects and short-term goals. And like, I think that if we recognize this, then like I think it makes it a lot easier in a strange way to interpret their movements. So when they, you know, maybe Dan's right. Maybe there is also a strata that says, you know, I can have an army of lunatics at my disposal, and they will be ultimately compliant because I will fuel their delusions, because I will tell them everything that they want to hear. And what they want to hear is quite simple. They want to hear that they are exactly what they claim to be, and they want their egos to be massaged on a daily basis, that they're essentially children in adults' bodies, and like psychotic children at that. Yeah, that's possible. Good luck with that. You know, I'll point to Bud Light. You know what I mean? Good luck with that, U.S. military. Good luck with that, Bud Light. Good luck with you assembling your army of Dylan Mulvaney's, because quite frankly, there just aren't enough of them. It's again an example of hubris at multiple levels that fails because it rejects reality. Go ahead, Luke, if it was Luke.
Yeah, so I just start the closing statements round here with a quick point I just thought about when I heard you talk, Grant and Mark, about this question, you know, hubris versus malice, or stupidity versus planning and all that, because I just watched the Netflix documentary Chimp Empire. And I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it's really excellent. I can highly recommend it. There was a great interview on Joe Rogan with a guy who made it as well. It's really spectacular. It's a chimp documentary, basically, but one you have never seen before like that. It's crazy, really. They spent like 400 days filming like all day long in the jungle, and they're basically part of the chimp troop for that time. It's just absolutely crazy. Anyway, and so this raises some interesting questions, right, about like our relationship to the animal world. And one thing that struck me when watching this, because obviously they dramatize it, right, for the film. So the narrator, you know, says things like, "Oh, and war is coming to the tribe," you know, and things like that, or you know, it's kind of like spins kind of a narrative around it, and even projects, you know, some humanity onto them while he's doing so. But you know, and here's my point: it's kind of maybe similar with that kind of stupidity and hubris versus like planned malice kind of discussion, right? Because what this narrator says about those chimpanzees, right? It's a narrative, a human narrative, but it is true right? I mean, this is really what is going on, you know, when he's describing those dynamics. That is what is going on. It's just from the perspective of the chimps, thing looks different, right? So they may not be aware of that kind of story arc, but they are playing out the story clearly, you know. And so what if that is kind of like our relationship to God, you know, or the higher, and those people who are like in power and being stupid and full of hubris and stuff, they're just stupid and just worthless POSs, right? I mean, that's just who they are and what they do. And the larger story, maybe, you know, God sees that, or like whatever, and is kind of the narrator that can give a narrative about it. And that is true as well, you know. So it's just that those people are not aware of it, but they're part of a drama that can be discerned, and maybe we can discern it as well, you know, if we look at it from a certain perspective. So yeah, so that's my thesis of the day.
I'll go next just to keep it moving along. And then whoever wants to follow me, just go ahead and raise hand or drop in the chat if you don't have anything left. But I'm pretty hopeful about the future because of, you know, this essay. It's too long to be an essay. It's almost like a book that I'm reviewing now. It gives me a lot of hope because you know, you can take existing military doctrine and you can interpose a spiritual domain onto multi-domain operations. And you can do so in a way that resonates. It's very useful. And I think it's what we can use to get back on the right track. Because this is something that I've been trying to talk about for a while, like, hey, spiritual conflict going on, but I'm a noob, you know, I'm a nominal atheist. And like I'm just a junior field grade. So, you know, what do I know? But it turns out there's people with more experience than me that do know this stuff and that put time into thinking about it and putting it all together. And I think that there is a way ahead, you know, in terms of leadership in order to try and get everybody back on the same page. You know, we talk a lot about Chris Langan and, you know, the CTMU and a meta religion. I think there's some way to kind of use that in order to get some sort of unity of purpose, at least at the national level, for us Americans, and then for other individual nations to select leadership that can do the same for them and go forward and have a multipolar world. And you know, there'd be conflicts over resources and stuff, but at the end of the day, I think it'd be a lot less volatile. And I think there's a lot of hope there for humanity to come together and have our own little multipolar things, differences. And in America, like dropping the federal system on that, we have even more particularity within the United States because states can have different rules, and that can get over some of the big, you know, local conflicts over, you know, abortion and the trade-off between, you know, mother's rights versus rights of unborn children, et cetera. I think there's a way ahead. I really do. And I don't think that World War III is inevitable. I think that there's a spiritual conflict going on and the good guys are destined to win. So yeah, since nobody else has anything to add, thank you all for joining us on Tonic Discussions episode 5, World War III. Until next time.